2 months in the hospital, and when I finally came home, it was like stepping into someone else's life. Strangers were splashing around in my lake like they owned it. I couldn't even breathe. The sand wasn't mine, the pavilions weren't mine, and yet, my name was carved into everything, assigned, stamped, celebrated as though I'd given away a treasure I never intended to part with. People treated me like some kind of martyr who'd sacrificed everything, while I stood there leaning on a walker, dazed, drained, and wondering if I was losing my grip on reality or if someone else had written a script I didn't know I was starring in. Here's what you need to know. I chose this house precisely because no one else wanted it. My name is Rick Dawson, 39 years old, a veteran who spent 8 years dodging bullets overseas and wanted nothing more than to disappear when I came home. The place sat alone at the end of a dead-end road, with a lake that previous owners couldn't afford to care for, perfect for me. My daughter Maya, 10 years old, was the only person I wanted close. The accident that landed me in the hospital happened on one of those nights when civilian life got too loud. I'd done what I always did, I paddled my kayak to the middle of the lake at midnight, but this time, I didn't make it back. 2 months later, I woke from a coma like someone had pressed fast forward on my life. Maya had been staying with my sister, and when I was finally discharged, Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor, picked me up since my truck had been wrecked. I was unsteady on my feet, wearing new glasses for vision problems from the head trauma. When I first saw it, a massive wooden sign stood planted beside my mailbox. Impossible to ignore. Bold letters read, Sunset Shores Community Beach, a Sustainable Development Initiative. Thank you, Rick Dawson, for donating your lake. Opening summer 2024. Mrs. Patterson pulled into my driveway and went on about how generous I'd been, opening my property for everyone. Her words barely registered. My eyes locked on the metal plaque attached to the sign, complete with my signature etched beneath an official-looking seal. My signature. With her help, I stepped out and grabbed my mobility aid. I expected to see my old backyard, the place where Maya once fed the ducks. Instead, I was staring at what looked like a professionally designed resort. White sand stretched across half an acre of shoreline, wooden walkways connected several pavilions. Neatly lined beach chairs faced the water, volleyball nets hung between poles, a pier reached into the deeper part of the lake, and speakers were wired into the setup. But what really froze me wasn't the construction, it was the people. At least 15 adults and double that number of kids were scattered across what used to be my private retreat. Some played sports, others lounged under umbrellas. Inflatable toys bobbed in the water. A group of teenagers had taken over the largest pavilion for what looked like a graduation party, balloons and cake included, while their parents snapped photos. I just stood there, stunned, thinking maybe I was hallucinating. Mrs. Patterson gave my shoulder a sympathetic pat and started talking about how the community had come together to bring my vision to life while I was recovering. Before I could even form words, a woman with a clipboard walked over. Beaming, she introduced herself as Linda Barton, president of the Homeowners Association. Linda thanked me endlessly, calling me an inspiration. She spoke so quickly and confidently, it was impossible to interrupt. She mentioned details I supposedly insisted on: family-friendly amenities, sustainable materials, imported sand I'd personally approved. She described pavilion designs I had never seen, let alone approved. The strangest thing? She wasn't mocking me, she was genuinely grateful, like I'd given up something precious for the good of everyone else. According to Linda's version of events, I'd not only donated access to my lake, but even helped finance the project because I believed in it so strongly. I wanted to shout that none of this was true, but a part of me wondered, had my injury wiped out entire conversations, decisions? Then a little girl tugged on my arm, thanking me for building her the best playground ever. She told me her mom said Mr. Rick was the nicest man in the neighborhood, letting everyone use his lake even though I didn't have to. Behind her, parents were firing up a grill while kids splashed where my fishing boat used to be anchored. The entire scene felt like I was watching through glass, except this time, I was the unwilling main character. Cold dread crept through me. This wasn't just people trespassing. This was a story already written, with me painted as the benevolent hero. My name, my supposed generosity, my so-called transformation, and none of it was mine. If I hadn't made these choices, then who had been making them for me? The chill stuck with me even as Maya's eyes lit up at the sight of kids playing in our backyard. Someone had stepped into my life while I was fighting for it in a hospital bed. The following morning, Linda called. She cheerfully invited me to a celebration ceremony marking the official completion of the Sunset Shores project. She explained it had been planned for weeks. It timed perfectly with my release from the hospital so I could be honored. I told her I wasn't ready, still recovering, but she insisted I was the guest of honor. After all, local officials would be there, sustainability councils, even a television crew. By the time I arrived, leaning on my walker, nearly 100 people had already gathered. Folding chairs dotted the imported sand. A stage was set near the largest pavilion, and the crowd looked expectantly at me as though I was about to deliver the speech of a lifetime. Linda guided me straight to the front row, introducing me one by one to officials, council members, and community leaders, all eager to shake my hand. Each of them repeated the same phrase as a local hero, inspiring role model, selfless neighbor. They clapped me on the shoulder, smiling as though I'd single-handedly changed the world. The sheer scale of the event was staggering. This wasn't some backyard gathering with a few neighbors and folding chairs. No, this had the polish of something professionally staged. A sound systems with booming speakers, a podium set up like a political rally, even a glossy banner stretched high between two poles. "Thank you, Rick Dawson, for your service to our community." Someone had poured money and time into this spectacle, which begged the question, just how long had they been preparing to celebrate my generosity? Linda stepped onto the stage and began the ceremony, her voice carrying across the sand with microphone clarity. She welcomed the crowd and immediately credited the entire project to Rick's vision. The phrase made my stomach twist. I'd never had any such vision. Her speech painted me as a man whose sense of duty hadn't ended with military service, but had naturally expanded into civilian life through this donation. According to her, my willingness to give up my most prized possession so that families without means could enjoy lake life showed leadership and compassion that defined our community. The applause was thunderous. I sat there, trapped in the front row, listening to a portrait of a man I didn't recognize. Me, but not me. Then things got worse. Linda announced a special video presentation featuring Rick's own words. A large screen descended from a frame built specifically for the occasion. Suddenly, there I was on screen speaking with passion about how selfish it was to keep natural resources private, about how sharing creates joy for generations. I froze. These weren't new interviews. They were fragments from old military footage spliced and rearranged. Years ago, I'd spoken about sacrifice, about serving something larger than yourself, about protecting others. Now those same words had been twisted into commentary about lake access and sustainable community projects. It was disturbingly well done. Unless you knew the original interviews, you'd never suspect they'd been butchered into propaganda. The final clip hit like a bullet. Me, same face, same voice, even clothes from my own closet, looking directly at the camera and declaring, "A lake kept for oneself is selfishness, but a lake shared becomes a gift for generations." The crowd erupted again, cheering wildly at this counterfeit version of me. I sat in silence, my mind racing, trying to understand how footage like that could even exist, especially when I'd been lying in a hospital bed for 2 months. Then came my turn. Linda called me to the stage. I dragged myself up to the podium, leaning on my walker, hard hammering. Dozens of expectant faces stared up at me, waiting to hear words of wisdom from their hero. I opened my mouth, ready to set the record straight, to tell them there had been a mistake, that I'd never agreed to any of this, that none of these decisions were mine. But before I could get out a sentence, a man in the third row shot up from his chair. "Rick Dawson is the kind of hero this country needs more of," he shouted. The crowd exploded. Applause. Cheers. People leapt to their feet. The noise drowned out my words before I could even begin. I tried raising my voice, waving my hands, anything to cut through the frenzy. "There's been a mistake," I started, but then a woman near the front began chanting, "Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rick." Within seconds, half the crowd had joined in. My voice was buried under the roar. Linda beamed from the side of the stage, nodding proudly as if this was exactly how things were supposed to unfold. Two men in matching polos of volunteer security stepped closer to me. They positioned themselves at the edge of the stage, smiling, but with a presence that felt less protective and more controlling. When I tried to step away from the microphone, one of them gently but firmly gripped my arm and pushed me back toward it. "The community needs to hear from you," he whispered, his tone polite but his grip like iron. It was restraint, not assistance. I leaned into the microphone, ready to shout the truth, when a voice from the back pierced the air. "Why are you trying to ruin this for everyone?" The words landed like an accusation. Silence spread through the crowd as eyes turned toward me. I suddenly wasn't the celebrated hero anymore. I was the problem. Before I could form a response, the cheering surged back, louder than before, swallowing my words completely. The applause stretched on endlessly while I stood frozen, realizing I was nothing more than an actor in someone else's script. Somewhere in that sea of smiling faces, the real architects of this fraud were probably watching me squirm, pleased at how neatly their plan was unfolding. That night, I finally tore open the folder Linda had pressed into my hands. The first page nearly stopped my heart. Temporary usage donation agreement dated 3 weeks before my accident. Impossible. I remembered that stretch of time perfectly. No meetings, no signatures, no agreements. Yet, there it was in black and white. My name, my signature, complete with the distinctive flourish I always put on the D in Dawson. The contract claimed I'd willingly allowed the HOA to develop recreational facilities on my lakefront for a 5-year term, with extensions possible. My hands trembled as I flipped page after page. Each document bore what looked like my signature, authorizing everything of the imported sand, the pavilion blueprints, even a $15,000 contribution toward costs. Every stroke of the pen looked authentic. Not just the shape of the letters, but the pressure, the subtle curves, details no amateur forger could replicate. For a moment, I questioned my own memory. Had the brain injury been worse than the doctors admitted? Had I really agreed to all this and simply forgotten? I knew myself. I knew what I valued: privacy, quiet, solitude. None of this fit who I was. The truth was unavoidable. Someone had forged not only my name but an entire history of false decisions to legitimize this theft. I slammed the papers down on the kitchen table so hard my coffee spilled across the surface, spreading like it was trying to wash the lies away. My chair screeched as I pushed back, pulse racing. The next morning, I called my old lawyer, Jim Morrison. He agreed to meet that afternoon, to look over the documents and figure out what kind of legal ground I still had left to stand on. Challenging what I was up against felt less like a property dispute and more like going to war with a professional fraud operation. Jim Morrison, my old lawyer, had handled the purchase of my house 3 years earlier, and he'd always been the kind of man who cut through the noise. I trusted him to tell me the truth, even if I didn't like it. When I spread the stack of contracts across his desk, he combed through them for nearly an hour. He flipped page after page, pausing, frowning, rubbing his temples as if each signature deepened the headache building behind his eyes. Finally, he leaned back and sighed. The signatures were too good. They weren't sloppy fakes. Whoever had forged them hadn't just copied my handwriting, if they'd mimicked the rhythm, the pressure, the little flourishes only I used. Proving them false, Jim explained, would require expert analysis, months of litigation, and a fortune in legal fees. Even then, the HOA could argue they acted in good faith, relying on paperwork that looked legitimate while sinking tens of thousands into development. If I fought this publicly, there was a real chance people would think I was lying and trying to wriggle out of promises I had actually made. The worst part? Jim didn't quite meet my eyes when he said it. For the first time, I felt like even he was doubting me. He dug deeper into county records and uncovered something that nearly made me sick. Documents notarized, filed, and time-stamped at the courthouse. The files claimed I myself had shown up in person to submit the donation agreement, complete with a photocopy of my driver's license and a sworn statement that I was acting freely. That evening, Maya came over for dinner. I'd been dreading it, and I was right to. She lit up the moment she saw the beach set up. To her, it was magical. She ran barefoot across the sand, excitedly pointing out the volleyball nets, the pier, the places she wanted to fish from without needing a boat. She begged me to buy colorful beach chairs like the ones the other families used, already planning parties with her friends. She kept thanking me, over and over. She said how proud she was that her dad was sharing something so special with kids who didn't have lakes of their own. That hurt worse than any forged contract. My sister later told me that during my coma, Maya had been bragging at school about how her father was giving the community a gift. She'd even written a report about environmental stewardship, using our lake as the perfect example. To her classmates, she was the daughter of a hero. Sitting on the deck, watching Maya splash in the shallow water with other kids, I started to wonder if maybe I was selfish for wanting it back. The families were polite, respectful, grateful. The children's laughter was genuine, but then I remembered that their joy was built on a lie. None of this had been my choice. Someone had stolen my identity, forged my consent, and used my name to bankroll their vision. Every smile I saw around the lake was stolen from me. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the forged signatures that looked indistinguishable from my own. Whoever had created them wasn't just skilled, they had resources, time, technology. This wasn't the work of some neighbor with a grudge. This was systematic, professional. And then the most chilling thought hit me. If they could pull this off while I was conscious, what had they managed to do while I lay unconscious in the hospital bed? The next morning, I decided to look myself up online. What I found made my blood run cold. There were social media accounts in my name on multiple platforms. Pages filled with photos of me, posts about sustainability, quotes about generosity, essays on community sharing. Online, Rick Dawson wasn't a recluse veteran. He was an environmental philosopher, a thought leader, and people believed it. Thousands of followers commented on how inspiring I was. Forums dissected my supposed wisdom. National blogs held me up as proof that property owners could rise above selfishness and give back. The posts stretched back nearly a year, long before my accident. There were even surveillance photos shots of me at the grocery store, the hardware shop, walking down the street. Whoever was running this fake Rick account had been following me, documenting me, weaving a believable persona over months. But what broke me was seeing posts made while I was in a coma. Updates supposedly written by me from the hospital bed. Messages thanking the community for their support, reaffirming my commitment to the lake project despite my medical struggles. One post, dated 2 weeks after the accident when I'd been in surgery to relieve brain swelling, read, "Even from this hospital bed, I know that sharing our blessings is what gives life meaning. I can't wait to see the beach project completed." I tried logging into the accounts, desperate to take them down, but every password was changed, every recovery email redirected. I couldn't access a single one. Online, the fake me was more convincing than the real me. That afternoon, I went knocking on doors. If someone had been impersonating me in person, my neighbors might know. At Mrs. Patterson's house, I asked her straight out about the project. She poured coffee, smiling warmly, and told me how excited she'd been when I'd first come by months ago to explain my vision. Then Bob brought out a folder. Inside were detailed notes he claimed I'd given him, diagrams of pavilion layouts, placement for sports equipment, my handwriting, my sketches. He even had a business card I supposedly handed him. Rick Dawson, a community development consultant, a career I'd never once claimed. According to them, I'd spent hours walking the neighborhood, talking to families about sharing natural resources, convincing them it was selfish to keep the lake private. Walking home, I realized with a sick certainty, fake Rick hadn't just lived online. He'd been walking my streets, talking to my neighbors, shaking hands, laying the groundwork. Someone out there didn't just look like me, they were me. At least, to everyone else, the deception was too layered, too flawless for one person. This wasn't just a neighbor's scheme, it felt bigger, organized. And then, just as that thought solidified, Maya ran up to me crying. She'd seen something on Linnea comments about how her dad was living a fake life. She showed me a post supposedly written while I was in surgery, one with thousands of likes. My stomach dropped. I'd spent days trying to prove these accounts weren't mine. Every lead hit another dead end. And then Maya, without realizing it, dropped a bombshell. For a school project on local heroes, she made a video about me talking about my amazing gift to the community. In it, she shared how proud she was, but she also let slip details no one else could know: how I hated crowds, how I'd chosen this house to escape people, how I valued silence after the military. To her, these details made my supposed transformation even more miraculous, but to me, they exposed the entire lie. The version of me the community believed in didn't match the man I actually was. When Ma Yan uploaded her video to her school's platform, it spread quickly among classmates, teachers, and parents. Within hours, it had escaped the confines of our neighborhood. People were sharing it as an inspiring story and narrative about how tragedy had supposedly transformed me into a generous community leader. The turning point came when someone posted Ma Yu's video in a forum dedicated to spotting staged or manipulated viral content. A media analyst pointed out something odd: the way Ma Yu described my sudden change of heart didn't line up with the gradual, carefully crafted timeline that appeared on my social media accounts. Fake Rick had supposedly been embracing this philosophy of community sharing for months, but according to Ma Yu, my decision had shocked even my own family. That inconsistency caught people's attention. Soon, digital sleuths began combing through my accounts, picking apart posts for clues. Within a day, they uncovered signs of fabrication. Photo metadata didn't match timestamps, suggesting editing or staging. Writing styles varied so much it was clear multiple people were behind the posts, and most damning, the accounts contained glaring mistakes about my military service, things I would never get wrong, but an impersonator easily might. A retired forensic analyst joined in and applied professional methods to the evidence. She exposed advanced photo edits and images showing me at events I had never attended. She discovered synthetic audio and clips of me giving motivational speeches. She even traced posting activity to IP addresses from places I'd never visited, including updates supposedly made from my hospital bed while I lay unconscious. The evidence was undeniable. What started as suspicion had become a full-blown case of elaborate identity theft. Meanwhile, Ma Yu grew increasingly upset. She couldn't understand why strangers online were questioning her father's involvement. After all, she'd seen the new beach herself, watched families thanking me, and heard neighbors calling me generous. I tried to explain someone had been impersonating me, making decisions in my name, but it was too big for her to process. She asked again and again, why would anyone pretend to be my dad? Were all the nice things people said about us just lies? Her teacher called, concerned. Parents at school were whispering about Ma Yu's video, some suggesting our family was suffering from an identity crisis, others wondering if I was unstable or in need of counseling. Though her teacher tried to be gentle, the message was clear: the community's faith in me, and even in our family, was cracking. That evening, Ma Yu and I sat quietly on the deck, watching families laugh and play on the sand that supposedly came from my generosity. I explained to her why I needed to prove the truth, that none of this had been my idea, that someone had hijacked my life. She listened carefully, then asked whether proving it meant children would lose their new playground, and whether their parents would be angry at us for taking away what they believed was a gift. Her words cut deeper than any accusation. She was right. Even if I proved the donation was a lie, the fallout would be messy. Families had built memories here. Kids had grown attached. Undoing it would hurt people who had only ever acted in good faith. The masterminds behind Fake Rick had been clever enough to entangle innocent lives with their scheme, making the truth dangerous. But when Ma Yu's expression shifted from confusion to determination, I realized she understood something I was only beginning to grasp. Truth mattered, even if it disappointed those who had believed in the lie. Then she asked a question that made my chest tighten. Dad, you broken bar, if someone can steal who you are while you're sleeping, does that mean they can steal who I am too? The weight of her words settled between us. This wasn't just about me anymore. If someone could impersonate me so convincingly, what did that mean for anyone's identity? The next morning, the storm arrived at my doorstep. Linda Barden appeared with two board members of the Homeowners Association, Treasurer Margaret Walsh and Secretary David Chen. Their stiff posture and grim faces told me this wasn't a casual visit. Neighbors were already gathering outside, listening for whatever was about to unfold. Inside my living room, Linda dropped a thick folder onto the coffee table with a crack that echoed like a gavel. She didn't waste time. The HOA, she said, was deeply troubled by the online chatter casting doubt on my authenticity, a chatter sparked by Mahu's video. Community members had invested not only money and labor, but also their trust in my supposed vision. Now, my backpedaling was threatening all of it. Margaret waved what looked like medical documents in my face, insisting that my head injury could easily explain memory gaps, personality shifts, or confusion about past agreements. Maybe, she suggested, I had simply forgotten that I had agreed to the donation before the accident. She even cited a doctor's note claiming my memory loss was severe enough to render me unfit to recall decisions accurately. Then David leaned in, jabbing his finger at supposed financial contracts, warning me of the legal fallout if I tried to withdraw. The HOA had already poured over $30,000 into construction. Families had made summer plans around my gift. If I now claimed fraud, I could face lawsuits from contractors, insurers, even neighbors. Every attempt I made to speak was cut off by one of them layering on another reasonable explanation for why I was wrong, unstable, or dangerous to the community. Linda reminded me how beloved Fictional had become as a reclusive veteran turned hero, inspiring kids, couples, even other towns. Margaret showed me glowing articles citing my story as proof of how one man's generosity could change the world. And David, his tone growing harsher, warned that my denial wasn't just selfish, it was legally indefensible. Through the window, I could hear neighbors murmuring, reacting to every raised voice inside my house. For nearly an hour, the three of them took turns cornering me, dismantling my words before I could even finish speaking. And when they finally offered to arrange medical evaluations to help me recover my memory, I realized what this really was, not a conversation, but a coordinated effort to erase the real me once and for all. They shifted the conversation toward the specifics of the beach project, offering compromises that sounded less like negotiations and more like traps. Every option forced me to accept some part of their false narrative, as if admitting even once that fake Rick was real. The whole time, I sat waiting for a moment to reveal the evidence I had, a proof that this entire story was fabricated. But whenever I tried to speak, one of them would cut me off with another polished argument, carefully designed to make me seem confused, ungrateful, or even dangerous. They had rehearsed this. Every objection I raised was met with a prepackaged response that framed me as either mentally impaired or morally corrupt for wanting to undo something that had supposedly brought joy to families. By the time they finished, it no longer felt like a discussion. It felt like I was on trial for fraud, with the verdict already decided. Outside, the cluster of neighbors had grown, their shadows stretching across my lawn, pressing against my windows like a silent jury. When they finally asked for my reply, I told them I needed time, that I would consult with an attorney before making any formal statement about the beach project. Linda gave me a look of sympathetic concern and said that was reasonable, but warned that the community would be watching my choices closely. She reminded me that my reputation as a trustworthy neighbor now hinged on my willingness to honor what people believed was my generosity. Margaret followed up coldly, saying the HOA would convene the following week to decide how to handle the matter if I kept insisting my involvement had been unauthorized. David didn't bother with subtlety. He shoved his papers together, his chair scraping across my floor as he stood abruptly, the gesture sharp and final. When they left, the realization hit me with crushing clarity. This wasn't just identity theft or property fraud. These people had constructed an entire alternate version of me, and they had done it so convincingly that doubting it made me look unstable. They positioned themselves as the calm, rational ones, a patient community leaders trying to guide an injured veteran who had lost his memory. Meanwhile, they painted me as the unreliable figure, selfishly trying to walk away from promises I never made. And the most terrifying part was the crowd outside. Neighbors peered toward my house with wary eyes, their expressions tinged with suspicion instead of sympathy. The truth was clear. They didn't want the real Rick Dawson back. They preferred the polished, fictional hero they had invented. Fake Rick served their needs. Real Rick was an inconvenience. Margaret had delivered the final blow before leaving a quiet warning that the HOA might vote to have me declared legally incompetent to manage my own property. That night, I realized I had one chance to take control of the story before they erased me completely. I grabbed Ma's tablet, set it up on the deck, and began a live stream with the beach development in full view behind me, undeniable proof of what had been done without my consent. My hands trembled as I held the camera, Ma clutching my arm for steadiness, while the viewer count shot upward and notifications flooded the screen. I introduced myself as the real Rick Dawson and told the world I was about to share how my identity had been stolen while I lay in a hospital bed fighting for my life. The contrast between my real self and the carefully crafted community leader people had come to know online was obvious within seconds. The chat exploded with comments noting how different I seemed from the inspirational figure they'd seen in posts and videos. I walked them step by step through the deception, starting with the forged legal papers that supposedly proved I had donated my lake rights. My voice shook as I read through the documents, showing signatures that looked identical to mine but had never passed under my hand. Whoever had orchestrated this had gone to extraordinary lengths to produce nearly flawless forgeries. Halfway through, Ma joined me on camera. Her presence did more than any technical proof could. She spoke about her confusion at seeing everyone describe her father as a selfless community figure when the man she knew was quiet, private, and reluctant to even attend neighborhood gatherings. Her innocent observations carried a weight no expert analysis could match. She made it clear, the generous benefactor people admired was a fiction. The stream drew thousands of viewers within an hour. Many had followed the original investigation sparked by Ma's school video, and now they poured into the chat. Digital forensics specialists, identity theft survivors, even legal professionals. They recognized the telltale markers of a sophisticated operation. Some noted that the forgeries and impersonation tactics could carry felony charges. Others pointed out the scheme was far too intricate to be the work of one person. As the broadcast continued, the chat transformed into a live investigation. Viewers shared discoveries, analyzed documents, and offered professional insights. A retired law enforcement officer noted the hallmarks of organized identity theft rings operating across multiple states. Cybersecurity experts identified the software used for voice synthesis and fake recordings of me. Someone else posted links to companies that profited from manufacturing online reputations for wealthy clients. Then came the breakthrough. A cybersecurity specialist uncovered metadata in one of the fake social media photos. Buried in it was a trace the image had been processed through editing software tied to an IP address. Within minutes, others in the chat had tracked that address back to none other than Linda Barton's home network. I read the discovery aloud, my voice uneven, hands trembling so much the camera shook. The chat erupted. Thousands of people realized they were watching a conspiracy unravel live. And then, the pounding started at my front door. The sound thundered through the house, picked up clearly by the stream's microphone. Viewers instantly filled the chat with speculation, convinced someone was trying to shut me down. Ma clung tighter to my arm as the pounding grew louder. Through the window, I saw neighbors crowding my lawn, faces lit by porch lamps and cell phones. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Someone was watching. Someone had realized that their truth was slipping away. Meanwhile, experts in the chat continued analyzing the evidence in real time. More doctored photos, more synthesized audio, even suspicious money transfers linked to shell companies funding the beach project. Each discovery added another piece to the puzzle of a carefully coordinated fraud. The evidence uncovered during the live stream pointed directly at the HOA board members. Legal experts in the chat explained that what we were looking at wasn't just a case of forgery or impersonation. This conspiracy likely involved federal crimes, wire fraud, mail fraud, and identity theft statutes carrying decades-long prison terms. By the time I ended the 3-hour broadcast, viewers had assembled enough material to fill a detailed criminal complaint ready for both state and federal authorities. Together, we hadn't just proven my name had been hijacked and my property rights stolen. We had also exposed the workings of what looked like a much larger criminal network. People from other states chimed in, describing eerily similar linked schemes. It became clear I wasn't the first victim, and likely wouldn't have been the last if this had stayed hidden. The most damning blow came when someone shared an archived version of Linda Barton's private social media. Screenshots showed her bragging about the beach project months earlier, posting photos of herself with contractors and overseeing construction on my property. Even worse were her own words, celebrating how much the development would inflate neighborhood property values. So much for her claims of environmental stewardship and community goodwill. Profit had been her real motive all along. Maya stayed awake beside me until the very end, her eyes wide as wave after wave of comments validated our story. She asked if this meant people would finally believe we never consented to share the lake, and if the families who had been enjoying the beach would realize they'd been deceived, not rejected. I told her the truth was finally out, but people might need time to process it. By the next morning, our stream had drawn over 3 million viewers and made national headlines. Legal analysts called it one of the most elaborate identity theft cases they'd ever seen. Cybersecurity specialists dissected the faked documents, altered images, and voice-cloned recordings. More importantly, the massive pile of evidence had caught the attention of federal investigators. Within 2 days, FBI agents contacted me to open a formal case. That week, I watched as agents served search warrants at Linda Barton's home and the HOA offices, hauling out computers, files, and bank records tied to the project. Linda was arrested in front of a stunned crowd during a library meeting, her face pale as agents cuffed her and read her rights. Margaret Walsh, David Chen, and several others, including the tech contractors who forged documents, were also taken into custody. The investigation uncovered that this wasn't Linda's first time. Evidence linked her to at least 6 other real estate schemes across different states. When the courts weighed the full scale of her crimes, the sentences were heavy. Linda received 18 years in federal prison. Margaret was given 12, David 8, and their hired specialists between 5 and 10 years each. Restitution orders brought more relief than I ever expected. Between damages, penalties, and asset seizures, compensation exceeded $100,000. The HOA was dismantled completely, its assets liquidated to pay victims. Linda's house, accounts, and investments were seized, ensuring her punishment lasted long after prison. But the best moment came when federal marshals supervised the demolition of every unauthorized structure on my land. I ripped out the sign that read "Thank you, Rick Dawson, for your lake donation" with my own hands, throwing it down with more satisfaction than I'd felt in years. In its place, I planted a new one. Rick's lake had the real one. Some neighbors came with apologies, ashamed they had been fooled. Others weren't so forgiving, furious that the beach was gone. A few even stood outside my house shouting that I'd robbed them of something they cherished. 6 months after Linda's sentencing, a class action settlement against social media platforms brought another check, enough for Maya and me to build a treehouse overlooking the lake. It became our sanctuary, a place no one else could claim. To show goodwill on my terms, I later opened the lake for community weekends during the summer, this time with proper agreements. Permission was now asked, not assumed. One evening, watching Maya fish from our rebuilt pier, I thought back to the day I woke up from my coma to find strangers partying in my yard. That false version of me, the invented Rick Dawson who had gifted away the lake, was gone for good. What remained was the real me, someone who had fought to reclaim his identity and property against impossible odds. The wooden sign at my driveway stood as proof that no matter how advanced the deception, my true self couldn't be stolen. They had tried to erase me while I slept, but I woke up in time to reclaim everything, and more. Just as life felt calm again, I found an unmarked envelope tucked beneath my mailbox. Inside was a typed note: Linda's downfall was only one piece of the puzzle. You've made powerful enemies. Watch your back, Rick Dawson. I gripped the page so tightly it nearly tore. The message was clear: this wasn't over. Someone was still out there, watching. Maya came running from the deck asking what I'd found. I slipped the letter into my pocket before she could see it. That night, while the lake lapped softly against the shore, I sat awake staring at the note. Winning didn't feel like closure. It felt like the opening move in a longer fight. Maybe the real lesson was that justice doesn't end with a single verdict. Survival means staying louder, sharper, and harder to erase than the lies built around you.